Welcome to Saltwater Reasonings. In this episode, I am in conversation with Cynthia Lubin Langtiw, a Haitian-American community and clinical psychologist, researcher, and teacher. We explore her framework, the Inter-logues, a relational and methodological practice that names what is often left unspoken in research and clinical training. We begin with arrival. Cynthia notices the cool in her body, the settling, the birds in my background. She reminds us that what can seem outside the scope is often the beginning of understanding. For her, interlogues are the pause and deep reflection that track transformation. What happens to us as researchers, as humans, as we move through stories, communities, and questions that matter. Across our conversation, Cynthia speaks about lineage and knowing, the grandmothers who sit with her in discernment, the Haitian Creole she misses on her tongue, and a childhood shaped by a healer who carried profound embodied knowledge. She also names the limits of expert-driven models, the erasure within professional training, and the importance of making peace with shaky places. This is a conversation about decolonizing psychology through reconnection, and about research's relationship rather than extraction. Let us begin.
Thank you so much for taking this time to sit and reason. How are you feeling moved to start?
To notice what's happening for me in this moment as we delve into talking about transformations. I notice the cool that I'm feeling. I notice the feeling that's happening for me. I notice myself hearing the birds in the background and how beautiful that is, and how we're here to have this conversation and all of this, how I'm feeling in my body, how I'm kind of finally settling in. The hearing of the birds, the feel of the cold beneath my feet and my hands. But all of those are pieces as researchers that we might think are outside the scope of what we're talking about, of what we're doing, of what we're here to do. We're here to record this interview. And yet, at its core, when I think about what research is, it's about understanding. And how can we start to understand one another, which is what we hope to do, right? In a true research process, if we don't understand or name where we are. When I think about what interlogues are, it is that pause and it's that reflection of what is happening to us in this process of research, of teaching. And today we'll talk about interlogues and the process of research, but really we're talking about that observation and deep reflection and articulation of the transformation that happens for us specifically as researchers and for us as qualitative researchers as we aim to understand. Perhaps part of the deepest understanding is of ourselves. What's happening for ourselves tells us part of what we're trying to understand and where we're going. And in my view, that's what interlogues are. It's a tracking, it's a naming, it's a reckoning with the transformation that occurs for us as qualitative researchers as we move through.
What a beautiful way to start. Thank you for grounding this reasoning in self and research as instrument. So often we think that the instrument that we're working with is some kind of protective, but remembering that we're the first research instrument and we're the research instrument that we bring to have counter. So thank you. I want to dive right in and ask you what personal or cultural experiences shaped your movement towards relational and community-centered psychology.
Well, as you well know, I gotta have my flag every time.
Sean, IT.
Community psychologist. And I always say that I come to the work that I do honestly, right? In terms of the relationality. I thought at one point that my interest in community psychology was mine, right? And then when I sat with my learnings, when I sat with how I came to know how to know people, how to know myself, how to know relationship, I realized that that wasn't all mine, right? When you ask Haitian people how you are, you ask how you and your people are, right? Because that's how you know how you are. And when I don't know when I came to that understanding of how the language that I even use to ask how folks are doing, even there, is about community and is about relationship. And it's how I learned to understand wellness and well-being is in community and the very initial languages that we use. So I think that it's always been a part. It's always been there, come to the forefront as I've allowed myself to clarify my values as a clinical and community psychologist, as I come to crystallize my values, and I found myself naming all of these inherently cultural values that I've learned from my mother and father and grandmothers. When I sit in moments of deep discernment, my grandmothers are always with me. And it's not something that I taught myself, right? They've always been with me, even when they were here corporally, in my spirit. And now that they're not in the corporal realm, they sit with me always as I sit in discernment and understanding of myself in the world. And understanding myself is situated in my family, but also in my ancestors specifically. Um, all of that became more clear to me as I think about how I know what I know. Um, so that's a start.
And I hear the ancestral presence and wisdom. You said it so beautifully that when I sit in discernment, both my grandmothers are with me. You said in culturally, when you ask how are you, you will ask how are you and your people. And I was curious to know, what does that sound like in Haitian Creole?
Qui j'en y est, qui j'en nou ye. Qui j'en moun yo ye. Bien. Tout moun bien. Blah, 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 you know. Yeah. It's funny speaking Creole now. So I live in Chicago and I grew up in New York and Miami, big Haitian enclaves, and there aren't a whole lot of Haitian people here, but I find them. I believe me, I find them. Right. And one of the things that I miss the most is the language in my mouth, on my tongue.
Yeah.
And it feels weighty even, and there's a missingness of that. Fun fact, Haitian Creole was actually my first language, right? Because when I was born, my parents spoke some English, my grandmother spoke no English, moved to the United States to help care for me. And so in our home, we spoke Haitian Creole. And this was probably 10 years ago, that I was talking about my dreams and the language of my dreams, and that I realized that English was not my first language, that it was actually Haitian Creole. And it gave me a moment of pause to recognize that even language and the way that I speak, the memory of it in my bones and my soul were different than what I was living, and I'm living in the moment. It was a really powerful recognition of a memory, gone, but then back. Yeah.
It's so funny when you spoke, I heard the rhythm. And Trinidadians sing, Trinidad and Tobagonians, we sing as well, right? There's a way in which
Same thing.
we sing.
Sing. Y'all sing.
We do. But you said it, and it is the language, it danced.
Yeah.
And there was a way that it moved. And there was a curiosity to the rhythm and the music. And I feel like that pairs so well with when I'm in my discernment, my grandmother, and that was their tongue. So they're here, they're doing that.
Yeah.
So we already started speaking to this. How does that identity of Haitian American, how has that identity informed how you understand healing, voice, and connection?
And I would add to that knowing. So both my grandmothers, brilliant women. My maternal grandmother was a healer. People would come to her from afar, right? When she was in the United States, when she was in Haiti, would come to her from afar to help heal their bodies and their souls in part as well. Neither of my grandmothers could read or write. My maternal grandmother could not write her name. She would sign her name with an X. And she said from a very young age that the solutions, the healing came to her from God. And so, she didn't know the names of plants, but she would come to know them and she would put things together that came to her. This was a knowledge that worked for so many. I was telling some of my students recently, I would watch her assessments, if you will, as she would sit with someone and knock on their back and listen, have them breathe, have them do short breaths, long breaths, and you would sit in the little corner. What is she? And then she'd ask them these questions that just seemed disconnected. And then she'd say, okay. And then she would say, this is what's happening. And then this is what you do. She would clarify, oh, yeah. No, okay. This is what you do. Do this, come back to me, and we will. And so I say all this to say from early on, I knew that what we write down in books, what we learned from these big encyclopedias that my parents had, those weren't the only ways of knowing. That the only knowledge worth having, and it wasn't the only storage of knowledge. That my grandmother couldn't have gotten her knowledge from anywhere but where she got it. And she had it, and you couldn't tell her she had it, and she used it, right? So you listened. And so early on, before clinical psychology, before multiple intelligences, right? I knew there were many ways of being brilliant. And I knew there were many ways of understanding how to be in this world. And so that foundation for me, and my grandmother was unique, and in many ways she wasn't, right? She was many Haitian women who themselves to receive knowledge over generations and African women before them, right? And so I knew that. And I don't know that I knew I had knowledge, but I knew that there was knowledge to be had that wasn't just in the books and that it was accessible and usable. So I think that knowing that and knowing that there are many different ways to heal and connect as well, that there wasn't a linear for everyone, but that it could be a beautiful panoply, I think was a big part of my fundamental different stance from what I was learning early on in my psychological career, if you will. And so as I pushed that aside and gained the knowledge that was being offered me academically, and I don't discount that knowledge. I think that there's something to all of what's offered to us. I began to allow my lens and my knowledge to speak to that, to interrogate it, to use that term, to see what knowledge was then mine. And even in preparing for this conversation this afternoon, as I was driving, I kept thinking to myself, I need to prepare. I want to continue to prepare. But I kept quieting the voice that said, you need to incorporate all of these pieces. And what Dr. Rogers wants to know is what you know. And there's a part of me that's scurried. What do I know? And then I thought, you know, and let yourself know. And that is precisely the conversation. What happens when we don't scurry away from the knowledge that we have and we settle into it?
So you have this solid foundation in
Mhm.
embodied epistemology. And then you invest a good bit of time
Yeah.
of your life getting expert
Hmm.
knowledge, professional knowledge.
Yeah.
When did you begin to recognize like the limits, just those limits of individualized clinical models? I know you go on to focus on community, but you start off with that intro to psychology. It's very much based on individual and pathology. When did that start to crack for you?
Sure. I mean, I think early on. So I started grad school a very, very, very long time ago. And diversity classes weren't actually, I don't believe at the time when I started, a requirement of a clinical program to go through AP accreditation in particular. And so the program that I had started in did not have a formal diversity class. And more than that, ideas about diversity, if they existed, were in large part textbooks aimed at teaching folks how to work with the other, and the other being ethnic minorities in particular. And I remember thinking, well, who are they teaching? Who is the gaze, right? Certainly it's me. I am the other, if you will. And my voice as a clinical psychologist and development isn't being explored here. I think there was an assumption that Black folks would know how to work with Black folks. And I think there are some intuitive knowledges, but there's also knowledge to be gained. But I think the questions weren't even being asked. It was clear to me that I was not the focus of this educational endeavor.
Mhm.
And so I realized that if I was going to be educated, if I was going to understand how to do this and how to do this in a way that was meaningful, that I would have to find out from folks who were asking these questions, right? And so it was early on that I realized that not having a diversity class was a statement in and of itself, but that even the assessments that I was learning, the textbooks that did come out were focused on making sure that psychologists in the majority knew how to treat those who were ethnic minorities.
Yeah.
And I again was erased from the conversation, both as a clinical psychologist, right? But also as a learner. And that erasure became clear to me. So I think early on, I recognized that, and it pushed up against something for me and made me say to myself, I need something more if I'm going to offer what I know I am intended to offer to my community and the communities that rely on me.
That's really powerful, that moment when you said, when I realized that I am the other, and that creates a tension. So would you say that interlogues began, was rooted by that tension, or did it take a little bit longer?
Oh, yeah. Great question. I think there were crumbs in the trail
Mm.
to logs for a very long time. And I would say that it took hearing someone else's articulation of a transformation for me to start thinking about how I've come to be, how I've come to bring all of the seemingly disparate thoughts, feelings, embodiments that I've had, knowledge that I've had, how it came to bring those together, but how all of these pieces were elements of the pause, the reflection that then brought me, to the place where I started thinking about interlogues in terms of research and translation. So I'd say all of those turns, all of those shaky places, those are all the space of interlogue. I've come to really love and embrace shaky places because what I learned that it's out of those shaky places that clarity for me comes, right? I would say the thing that excites me the most about interlogues, right, is we talk about bracketing and reflexivity, all of which I think are really important processes. I'm not going to get on my whole rigor and validity soapbox, which I have for my students, because I believe all of those pieces and all of the things that we do, right, to ensure rigor and qualitative research are important, not because we want to get published, but because all of those are the ways that we get rid of the fluff that gets in the way of us really being able to hear the voice of the participants, to understand what it is they're wanting us to communicate to the world on their behalf. And so I'll say that reflexivity and bracketing are critical along with all of those other elements. I think for me, what is important about interlogues is that they're the place where the personal, the cultural, and then the methodological intersect, and they refuse to be separated. And what I mean by that is it's the acknowledgement, not just of who we are and what we bring to the table as a static positionality statement. It's the acknowledgement of us being in relationship with the question. It's an acknowledgement of us being in relationship with the participants. And it's acknowledgement that there's an alchemy, there's a transformation that's occurring that I believe is necessary if we're going to truly understand what's meant to be understood. And that transformation in part happens for us. And the interlogue is both the process and the articulation of the process. The interlogue is the transformation, and it's the sharing of the transformation with ourselves, with each other.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about students who are watching this reasoning and getting clear, because it's not dialogue. It's not just what you say. I'm hearing that interlogue is a process, and it almost feels as though it's making visible a process. So I guess I want to ask if you were going to give a definitive definition of what are interlogues and how does it differ from dialogue or therapeutic conversation or research conversation? How
Mhm.
would how would you crystallize that?
Yeah. So I would say interlogues are a chapter in the research process that explicitly capture the transformation that occurs for the researcher through the research project, right? They can include critical elements of self-reflection, like reflexivity and bracketing and memoing and positionality. But they take the next step by asking that the researcher explicitly examine and articulate the actual process of change. So in my view, interlogues answer the question, how did the research process change you? And you get to fill in the blank of the you. You, the researcher, you, the human, you, the clinical psychologist, community psychologist, social worker, writer, parent. How did this research process change you? Interlogues are an answer to that question.
You've said this framework that's really making things visible about the internal process seeds of the researcher, about their sense of connection. I love the question, how does it change you? I've not done a piece of research that has not changed me. I haven't. I can't think about a single participant that I've sat with, but I've never documented the how. And if I'm feeling the difference between interlog and a reflexive journal because I'm reflecting on what's happening, but it doesn't necessarily direct you. Like sometimes you will upon page, but it doesn't direct you to do that. So I want to ask about that process and how do you integrate that with relational cultural theory because we're talking about your beginnings and how you came into understand the world. How does that integrate for you?
Sure, I have a couple of stories I can share. So first off, I want to share by the term interlogue, right? When I heard it, just something for me. And so I had, they are now a clinical psychologist in the field, Dr. Fern Pinkston. And at the time, this was maybe 10 years ago, they were doing a dissertation on first time mothers and what it was like for them to start showing. And the dissertation was called Showing. It was really a beautiful. And so she's moving through her interviews and it's going well, but gathering data. And she has shared this publicly as well. And so, has shared that I can share this story. And we actually did a presentation together on the interlogues a while ago. So partway through, she has an aunt who's about half a generation older than her. They're very close, who was pregnant first time, right? So what a beautiful parallel. During the dissertation process, this aunt loses the baby. Fern is collecting data, and then this thing happens. And the joy, the newness, right, with which she had approached each of the other interviews was different. Something had fundamentally shifted for her. Participants didn't know it moving on, but the question changed for her. And we consulted, and I was her dissertation reader. And what she did was write a chapter in between the results and the discussion called Interlogues. And she talked about what happened for her and what shifted in the project as a result of this experience. And it was such an important understanding and grounding of where then the dissertation went. And I started thinking about transformation, how we think about it. Fast forward, I had another student who was doing a dissertation on Islamophobia. And it was taking a long time, right? And this was many years ago. I can't remember what year exactly. And at the time, there was heightened Islamophobia in the United States, and it was post 9/11, but within 10 years of that. So there was still a lot happening. And so she was in her early 20s at the time. She's collecting stories of, young emergent adults, their stories of Islamophobia and how it was related to their career trajectories, I believe, right? So she's collecting data and she's having a hard time. So she meets with me, right, as a qualitative consultant on her dissertation, and she's having a hard time writing. And then we meet and she has all her data. I'm like, oh, this is great. And she's moving through it. Oh, this is wonderful. And when we sit together, we realize the issue isn't her workflow or what she's done. It's that this is such weighty material. There's a way that it reflected her own experience and pushed up against so much, right? And so I encouraged her to do some reflection on that, right? And the story that we can have is I'm lazy, I'm not working hard enough, maybe I'm not cut out for the. And for me to sit there and say, oh my gosh, these stories, whew. And she was like, oh yeah, I guess that is. And I move on and she's ready for defense. It's great. We're at her dissertation defense and her parents are there. And her mother had been observant, but was in hijab since. And so that was a transformation that happened within their family. So all of these pieces are happening. And as part of her dissertation results, she was going to read some of the quotes, right, from the participants. And she goes to start reading them and she gets choked up. And so, we take a moment and I said, oh, okay, I'll read some. And I had read all of this before and I go to read them. And to say the words out loud, I got choked up. And I thought, the stories that this person held about themselves and the inadequacies and what she was reading was her own experience multiplied and systematized, right? What she was taking in and what she had to do and metabolize, and that there weren't enough spaces to explore that. And then the moment of self-reflection, but then also recognizing what it was doing for and to her and with her, right, was a critical moment to move forward. And her recognition of that transformed who she is, not just as a researcher, but as a clinical psychologist. Because what she also realized was how important her unique voice was for her community and all others, right? And so when I think about interlogues, they're about that transformation. Like what happens to us when we're doing this work that's really important to us? Because the reality is we don't choose work that isn't.
Yeah.
And so, yes, something's going to happen. And my hope, my invitation with interlogues is to explore that something that happens so that we can learn fully the lessons we're meant to learn and not leave any learning on the table, but like really take all of it with us, because the learning isn't just that published article. It isn't just that finished dissertation. That learning is who I am. And for me, that's the beauty, that's the excitement of interlogues, right? Because it gives us that space to say, oh, look at me, look at who I am now.
And it feels like such a departure from what we're taught research is supposed to be, right? Even as a qualitative researcher.
Even as a qualitative researcher.
Yeah. So qualitative research, as I initially learned, it was also very clean, right? Because we were trying to
Yes.
be clear. Even when we did reflexivity, it had a place to go. The thing that I'm hearing to and I'm thinking as you speak, like reflexivity was a way of bracketing. Let me talk about who I am so I can now take that out of the research process and put it aside. And that will make me more, and we don't like to use the O word, but as qual researchers, but it will make us more objective and then we see more credible. It will do that. So that even the reflexivity, it was a checkbox and it was a way of removing yourself. And it's evolved. But what strikes me about interlogues, it does the absolute opposite. It says, now that you've talked about this, let me put it back into the research.
Yeah.
Now that I've isolated who I am, because I probably share a sociopolitical location with you. Maybe I share it on the opposite side of the road from you. Maybe I share it as a close neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I was living with it and wasn't aware of it. How does that now change me? So I think about qualitative research, and here's the question: how does interlogues function? How does it function to decenter and then recenter both the participant and researcher? Is it interesting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's in there.
The way that I think about it is that it also makes explicit the interdependence. This research process isn't about the participant. This research process isn't just about the question. This research process is about coming to know. And in my view, interlogues names that interdependence, that it does not happen without alchemy of the researcher and participants, that it's not a us them, it's together, right? Like this is the research process. They're not separate. This is a holistic process. And by naming the interlogue, we are putting back together a process that I think was artificially separated. This idea that the researcher, the question, and the participants and what they say and the results are completely separate entities that you can understand outside of each other. You can't understand this research without understanding who asked these questions and who is making meaning. And you can't understand the meaning maker without understanding what happens for them. And so I think it puts back together something that was artificially separated.
I want to talk a little bit about ethics and institution now. What are the ethical responsibilities that emerge when you're working with these relational spaces?
I think one of the elements of interlogues and everything under the reflexivity, bracketing, positionality that I think are critical is that it allows us to recenter the participant. Like you think about the institutional review boards. And the aim of the institutional review boards is to protect people. And in some ways, that protection is about saying, hey, we are going to ensure that we're not extracting. We're going to make sure that folks are cared for. We're going to make sure that the information that they provide is worth it. It's going to move our field. It's going to add something to human knowledge. At its loftiest, that's what research does. It lifts us up and helps us understand and know. So when I think about interlogues and ethics, I think about how we aim to center participants' voices and do all that we can to make sure that that happens. And reflective accountability that comes with interlogues is a part of that, in my view. It helps the researcher to name their responsibility to themselves, to the story, to the research, to the participant, right? And I think that participants and the larger world consuming this research, if you will, deserve that, deserve clarity.
You started to talk about IRBs, and that kind of brings us to the institution. Where do institutions struggle to hold this kind of work? When you include this in your proposal that you're going to do this, or perhaps when you are discussing it,
Yeah.
having the dissemination of findings, like what are some of the tensions there?
So here's what I think is interesting, right? Is that educational institutions, education, if done right, I mean, I'm not going to get on my bell hooks soapbox. If done right, transforms us.
And it should be done right.
Yeah.
So if it's not transforming us, what is it doing?
What are we doing here? So education's supposed to transform us.
Yeah.
And yet part of what I think is problematic in our educational system is the focus on the end result, the finished paper and the finished student, the finished product, and not being as attentive to the process, to the shaky places, to the mistakes, to the redoings, right? There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of, right? And so what I would say is that a critical element of our learning educational institutions, but more broadly, is understanding and supporting the entire process, the ups and the downs, and not just rewarding the finished product that is at a particular level, but celebrating the transformations, the bearing of the shaky places. And so I think that when I think about what's respected in the academy, if you will, it's the perfect finished product. And I think one of the things that institutions can and ought to do is to encourage for us all, I was going to say our students, but no, but for us all to be in those shaky places and to be able to move on and move through as we're in those shaky places. So if I'm in the midst of a transformation, if I'm in a place of not knowing, allowing for that, not just to be okay, but to be expected. Because if we let our students know, we expect that you'll falter and we will be here to support you. If as an academy, we support faculty in being in shaky places, the places that we know the most learning and excitement and creativity come from, as well as all of the other ways. Oh, how much beauty and creativity and truth can come from that, right? That felt like my grandmother. Truth.
Cynthia, because it's gold. Ugh, like, where do we start to unpack this? There's so many things.
One interlogue at a time, right? It really is so. It's so liberating because it's like, oh my gosh, this institution, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, but we could also have a class session where students feel really shaky, they leave shaky, and they know that's okay. And they feel supported and scaffolded.
And I'm also thinking about faculty in the academy. Because if the focus is on this finished, perfect product that's degreed, that gets rounds of applause, depending on if it gets first class honors or not, like the hierarchy is even there at graduation, right? So we know what we're going for. And that's the goal. And
Yeah,
we, faculty, we're the bearers. So it's even more impressed on us
yeah.
to not be shaky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's not allowed. It's not okay. And it needs to be. It has to be. If we're going to be who we say we are, or
Yeah.
who we aspire to be at least,
Yeah.
right?
We're talking about interlogues, and we have done ethnodrama together,
Yes.
working with theater and drama specifically for the intention of research.
Yeah.
And it's so funny when we're talking about interlogues, from the time we started talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
I started thinking about performance.
Yeah.
I started thinking about how we can perform interlogues. Um, and how it's almost as though, we talked about the researcher and the fact that the researcher is changed, and then who bears witness to this change? And how does that change continue to trigger and stimulate other conversations?
Mm-hmm.
So much vulnerability involved in doing that
Yeah.
in an institution that expects perfection and performance. But I feel the ethnodrama here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I don't know if you know this. I wrote we're doing that special issue on the ethnodrama that we worked on together. And I did the intro and the end. And I ended up calling it Interlogues. And I'll tell you why. Because each of the pieces, which was a reflection on what happened for each of the researchers, was in its essence an interlogue. It was like, oh, what happened for me?
I have a paper in that special issue,
You do?
and I didn't think it was an interlogue, but it is an interlogue. I haven't seen the full volume, so I've only really seen my piece, but
Right. Yeah.
it was an interlogue.
Each one of them was. Each and every one of them was. There was a personal, professional transformation, some reflection of not just what was it like to be in this ethnodrama, but what did this mean for me?
Yeah.
Right? And
Maybe we
so,
can talk a little bit about it,
yeah,
and hopefully by the time this airs, it will be out in the world.
yeah.
It's been in the technical editing phase for a while, but just for people who are watching and trying to follow, to talk a little bit about this work that we did together. Yeah. And then how you brought it together with that piece.
Sure. So Dr. Rogers and I are ethnodramatists. So we worked on a project where we worked with a colleague of ours, Dr. Charles Vanover, who had created an ethnodrama. An ethnodrama is a dramatized version of a qualitative research transcript. Is that a good definition, you would say?
Yeah, the dramatized version of an ethnography.
Of an ethnography, right? And this project was, we performed the ethnodrama. So there was a group of about 7 or 8 of us that performed the ethnodrama at a conference. We did a talk back with the participants who were the audience members. And then we each wrote up our reflections of the process for us from different angles, if you will. It's going to be a special issue in the qualitative report. Look out for it soon. And so as I was tasked with writing the reflective final piece with Dr. Van Zel de Castro. We were tasked with writing the final piece. And as I was reading through all of them, and they were amazing, what I realized was that each researcher, right, who were also the participants in the ethnodrama, acting it out, doing the music, directing, each of them talked about their work in the ethnodrama, but also how it connected for them personally and professionally. And then the result of what it meant to work on that team. And in many ways, each of them were an interlogue. It was a cataloging of what happened for you as a result of that research process.
Blowing my mind, because in writing that piece it was the first time that I started using folklore, and in particular folklore from Trinidad and Tobago and the Eastern Caribbean, using it as a methodological frame. And I have not made this connection before, right? So now I'm delving more and more in that work, but when I wrote this paper, it was the first time I did that.
Yeah.
And it emerged from me basically speaking about what changed for me when I did this ethnodrama, and what it gave birth to for me was deepening the way that I do research and dipping into my own cultural reservoir of knowing, which is tied to folklore, in particular Lajabless, and looking at that as a methodological frame for my work. And it came about because Charles said, "Tracie, write a reflective essay. What happened to you when you did this?" It was so accidental, but if that hadn't happened, I mean, I probably would have, we talk about just understanding our knowledge and the things that exist and how we have a path. So this was supposed to happen. But this interlogue was an invitation to make that a reality.
Oh.
Thanks for that.
So even that, there are ways that we do this. And, part of my excitement around interlogues is that I help folks make that clear to themselves and then with others.
Yeah.
Because there are ways that we already do this. And the extent to which we can be explicit makes them learning all the more clear for us and how we're using that moving forward. But then also in whatever else we're doing, it becomes more of a guide and a path, that specific learning, right?
We've talked a lot about research. And these reasonings are really about research and global knowledge. But I want to talk a little bit about your work as a psychologist, your commitment to decolonizing psychological practice in different ways, and really delving into collective futures. The interlogue is a decolonizing process in and of itself, right? So we've already we've already seen that.
Yeah, we're in the process. Let's name it.
Yeah, let's name it. And you are a teaching and research leader at your institution as well. There's a 2-part question. how might interlogues shift how we train clinicians? You train clinicians, you also train researchers, you also do clinical supervision. How might it shift how we train clinicians, researchers, and supervisors?
Great question. I think the first piece is that it acknowledges that we are not a sage on the stage. We're not outside of the clinical room. We're not a blank slate. We exist. We exist in a relational space. Clients come in to see us. They're not just seeing a clinical psychologist, they're seeing you. And so if you have a hard time articulating who you are as a cultural being to yourself, it's going to be hard for the client to understand who you are. If you have a hard time articulating to yourself your values, what you bring to the table, your assumptions about what it means to be in relationship with another human being, what is supposed to be happening here, what healing means, what it looks like, what you believe about wellness, right? If you have a hard time articulating that for yourself, it's going to show up in the therapeutic space. It's going to show up in your interactions with communities. And so I think that interlogues are an invitation to reflect on who you are and who you are becoming. And inherently exploring who you're becoming means you're understanding who you are. And so I feel like interlogues cheat a bit because they jump to the becoming as though we know who we are in the here and now. So interlogues are also an invitation to reflect on who we are,
Yeah.
not just who we're becoming.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's as a researcher, that's as a clinical psychologist. What do I believe? How do people get better? Do people get better? Are people supposed to be happy? Can we find joy in any situation? Is it okay to be sad? Is it okay to be angry? What do I believe? I don't know. Well, I better find out, right? If I'm going to sit across from another human being and interact with their beliefs around this, I better know what I believe. And then I better clarify where I want to go and how I'm getting there through the relationship. And that's how, in my view, it evolves. And similarly in supervision, as I think about what is my aim in supervision? My aim in supervision is to help those who are becoming understand their foundation and not just where they want to go, but why. Why is it that you think this is the path of where you want to be? What are the beliefs that are telling you this is where you want to be and this is the way to get there? And to help them to move through all of this interlogging, all of this transformation with support and clarity for themselves. And so when I think about the exploration of the transformation of who we're becoming, it's inherently cultural big C, little c, because of all of what we know, believe, what we know about knowing, what we hate, what we like, all of it is in the space with us. And then we're deciding, well, we want to then transform that to become this as a clinical psychologist. Well, you got to know what all of this is. And you got to know what this means to you and explore with intentionality the path there. And I believe interlogues in many different ways, the kinds of questions that we ask in reflection, in the embodied knowing, in the sitting still and listening, right? My mom would always say, Shita su tishes bao. So like sit on your little chair, right? Sit on your little chair and then you'll hear, right? The adults are talking, and if you sit, then you hear. If you sit low and just listen and don't get caught up in, but sit and listen to the wisdom that's already there, there's so much that we can learn. And I think that that's part of the interlogue. It's the sitting and listening, right? Shita, sit, listen, tande, sit and listen, right? To the wisdom that's there. And also, I mean, I think one of the biggest lessons for me of interlogues has been the sitting with the shaky places. Making peace. I was going to say being comfortable, but that's not it, because it's okay to be uncomfortable. Making peace with the shaky places. Embracing the shaky places as the place of transformation. So, right now for many people, that shaky place embodied is like, oh, no, right? But interlogues, with practice, your body can shift so that the shaky place becomes a ooh, you know, something's coming here, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I'm shaky. They're gonna know I don't belong here, that I don't know everything already. Goodness gracious, that's why you're at school, right?
Making peace.
Yeah, making peace with the shaky places, I think, is one of the most important decolonial, if you will, disruptive, that pushes back against the perfection lesson in academia, like making peace with that pushes up against all of those pieces for research, for clinical work, for all of it. Yeah.
So I don't know if you can speak about it, but I'll ask, right? So I know that you're doing a clinical leadership program now.
Yes. I can't, well, it hasn't started yet, so I will talk about it. I'm so excited. So
Yeah.
speaking of shaky places, if you will, the American Psychological Association has a Leadership Institute for Women in Psychology. Been selected to be part of the next cohort, which starts in 2 weeks from today, actually. And there's all kinds of stuff that we're doing to prepare for it. But when I love teaching, that's actually been one of the biggest surprises of my career.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, I've known since I was 14 that I was going to be a clinical psychologist. Like, I was reading Freud and Anastasia Pupnik, and I was like, I'm going to lead a life of the mind. Anyway, but what it looks like today is so different than I could have ever imagined. And the joy that not just joy, but that sense of deep purpose that I get from doing something that I know I was meant to do. Like, I really believe that this is my calling, this is my purpose. And I feel so grateful that I wake up every day and I'm doing this thing that I was meant to do. And it's actually helping people and supporting, and I can pay my bills. Because a lot of people work hard. A lot of people study hard. A lot of people work much harder, if you will, than I do every day, and don't necessarily get to live their purpose. But early on in my career, when I first got in front of a classroom, I thought, oh my goodness, right? I love these exchanges of ideas. I love being able to support folks in getting where they want to go. I love learning, and I love sharing that learning and producing knowledge and transforming knowledge. Uh, and so one of the biggest joys of my career has been coming to know myself as a teacher. And so when I thought about, okay, what's this next turn? Because I'm of a certain age. And as I think about this next turn of my career, I mean, I love my job now. I teach, I see clients, I work in community. I mean, I am living the professional dream. I'm so grateful. But I also think, what is my mark? What is it that I'm leaving in our field? And how can I be intentional about what that is? And so I really think about who I am as a teacher. And I think that some of these ideas crystallized could really help support a whole new generation of teachers who take up the mantle in a way that I think is meaningful for our field. So I've really been thinking about what I can offer in terms of supporting people to teach clinical psychology in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I see that. I'm so happy to hear you speak about it as the next step. The
Yeah,
evolution of you, like how do you know take interlogues and the work that you've been doing into a
yeah,
leadership advocacy.
yeah, yeah. And what does that mean? And so I'm really excited about, in terms of the Leadership Institute for Women in Psychology, the opportunity to sit with others and to be really intentional about taking the pause to develop,
Yeah.
stirring within me. So yeah, that's and when I think about an interlogue, right, I think about the nudges that we get. And part of interlogues are listening to those nudges and making those clear and making space for those nudges to teach us, to open up something for us. And I'm excited that I'm hoping that giving myself this time of reflection and action in this program and writing will allow some space for this particular nudge.
I am so excited. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. And I don't know if this leads into this because we're starting to wind down,
Yeah.
but I wonder what questions remain unfinished for you. What is still emerging in your work?
So as I've explored interlogues, it's pushed up against a lot of questions for me about what it is we're doing, where we're going. But I think about the importance of teaching about transformation. I don't want to be regimented, but I also want to have a structure that allows for depth, because I think with structure, folks can kind of let go into the depth. So I think about how to teach about transformation with rigor and depth, but also spaciousness that centers otherness. However, folks, right? And brings those of them pushed to the margins to the center so we're all heard. So I think how to teach about transformation with spaciousness and rigor, balanced. How I can, as a leader in my institution, because there's a certain level of that I've come to, that I've achieved, that I've earned. There's a certain voice that I have within my institution for which I'm very grateful. And so I feel like I can ask questions that maybe some others can't. And so how can I help our institution and engage in processes that are inherently messy? How can I encourage us as an institution to embrace the shaky places? I think that that's one of the questions. What do I do with this privilege that I've earned in voice and place? Folks do listen to me. And so I better have something worth saying.
This has just been beautiful. We started by taking some time to arrive, and I'm glad that we did.
Yeah.
Feel like from that arrival place, we were then able to really allow
Yeah.
ourselves to go where we needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as we close, I want to invite you to leave us with a final image or a sharing of yours
Yeah. Yeah.
that speaks to the power of all of the work that we've been talking about: reconnection, relationality, groundedness, transformation.
Yeah. And so I thought about this a lot as well. I think a lot. I'm up here all the time.
I'm in here. You're both places.
Yeah. I'm more in here these days too. But anyway, I wrote a poem.
You wrote a poem.
I'll share it. Invitation. There is a moment in every interlogue when mind, heart, and spirit drift back to a project that held you, a connection that surprised you, a reaction you didn't expect, trepidation that made you pause, vulnerabilities and shaky places you could no longer set aside, a revelation that quietly rearranged you. This is the work of interlogues, not just reflexivity or bracketing, but the deeper naming of transformation, the question at the center. How did this research change you? Interlogues guide us to discover, to document, and to speak the truth of that change, honoring the ways we are moved by the people and the stories we encounter. They remind us that knowledge is relational, that becoming is a part of the method, and that sharing our transformation is an act of care. Interlogues are an invitation to name the shift, to hold the revelation, to share the change.
Thank you, Cynthia.
As we close, I keep returning to how Cynthia framed interlogues with such clarity. Interlogues are a chapter in the research process that explicitly captures transformation. They answer a direct question that many of us feel when we're document. How did this research change you? Throughout this episode, Cynthia showed us that the personal, the cultural, and the methodological do not sit in separate rooms. They intersect. They refuse separation. Interlogues name the interdependence between researcher, participant, and question, and they put together what institutions often split apart. She also offered a generous challenge to the Academy to stop rewarding only the finished product, to learn how to hold the process, especially in the shaky places where truth, creativity, and meaning actually emerge. Cynthia closed with an invitation to name the shift, to hold the revelation, and to share the change as an act of care. I hope this episode stays with you as a question you can carry into your own work. Thank you for listening to Saltwater Reasonings. If this conversation moved you, share it with someone who is also carrying the practice and research from a place of integrity. You can learn more about Cynthia's work at tracierogers.com/saltwater reasoning. Until next time, take care.